Mom, there's a man pointing a gun at me. I heard my daughter's voice, eerily calm on the phone. Don't worry, I'll handle it, but you might want to come home now, before this guy becomes the evening news. I rushed out of the conference room, leaving behind startled faces of my colleagues. We had moved into this neighborhood just 2 weeks ago. Who would have thought the homeowners association would welcome my daughter with a gun barrel? They picked the wrong house. More importantly, they had no idea who she was. If you're watching this video from an HOA nightmare of your own, drop a comment below and let me know what ridiculous rules they've tried to enforce on you. I never thought I'd be in this situation. After 20 years of marriage, a surprisingly amicable divorce, and finally purchasing my dream home in Oakwood Estates, I expected peace. That's what the brochure promised. A peaceful, well-maintained community where neighbors become family. What it should have said was, a tyrannical micro-kingdom where your property isn't really yours and armed wannabe cops might threaten your loved ones. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and explain how this all started. My name is Sarah Mitchell, 45 years old, and I'm a consumer rights attorney in Chicago. After the divorce was finalized, I wanted a fresh start in a nice neighborhood with good security and beautiful surroundings. Oakwood Estates checked all those boxes. The colonial-style homes, manicured lawns, and friendly neighbors I met during the open house sold me on the place. The realtor mentioned there was an active homeowners association, but honestly, I didn't think much of it. I'd lived with HOA rules before. How bad could it be? The answer, much, much worse than I could have imagined. On my first official day as a homeowner, I was arranging furniture when the doorbell rang. A nervous-looking woman in her early 50s stood there with a thick binder. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm Karen Wilson, the HOA secretary. This is your welcome package and rule book. Please review it as soon as possible to avoid any incidents." The way she said incidents made it sound like breaking HOA rules might result in some sort of public flogging. I thanked her and took the binder, noticing how she glanced over her shoulder before hurrying back to her car. Strange behavior, but I chalked it up to social awkwardness. Later that evening, I flipped through the rule book, my attorney brain immediately spotting numerous legally questionable provisions. No parking on the street between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., even for guests. No gatherings of more than 8 people without prior HOA approval. Mandatory attendance at quarterly HOA meetings. Fines starting at $50 for first offenses, doubling with each subsequent violation. The most absurd. The HOA board reserves the right to enter properties with 24-hour notice to inspect for compliance with regulations. That provision alone was legally unenforceable, a clear violation of property rights. I made mental notes to clarify these issues at the next HOA meeting, then set the binder aside, focusing instead on making my new house feel like home. A week later, my daughter Jessica arrived for a 2-week visit during her vacation time. At 32, Jessica was my pride and joy. Brilliant, level-headed, and accomplished. What few people knew, including our new neighbors, was that Jessica was an FBI tactical team commander with 10 years of experience in high-stress situations. She didn't advertise her profession, preferring to describe herself simply as government employee when asked. I was thrilled to have her staying with me. Not only did I miss her terribly since she'd been stationed in the DC office, but I also wanted her advice on some home security upgrades I was considering. The morning after Jessica arrived, we were enjoying coffee on the front porch when a small, elderly woman approached from the house next door. "You must be Sarah's daughter. I'm Linda Thompson, the neighborhood gossip, according to our illustrious HOA president." She chuckled warmly, extending her hand to Jessica. "Welcome to our little kingdom. Careful not to break any of the royal decrees, or you'll meet our self-appointed security chief, Doug. He thinks that badge he bought online makes him the sheriff of Oakwood County." Linda had a conspiratorial glint in her eye that immediately made me like her. She lowered her voice theatrically. "Watch out for Richard Connors, our HOA president, former cop who retired early. Word is he was forced out after some scandal, but his buddies helped him avoid charges. Now he runs this place like his personal fiefdom, and Doug is his loyal enforcer." That afternoon, Jessica helped me unpack the last few boxes while I told her about the ridiculous HOA rules. "Sounds like someone with control issues," she observed, expertly arranging my book collection. "I've seen this before, small power and limited domains going to people's heads, usually harmless, just annoying." How quickly we would discover just how wrong that assessment was. I parked my car that evening, apparently 2 inches over the designated space line, a line that wasn't even visible in the dim street lighting. The next morning, a bright orange notice was stuck under my wiper blade. "Violation, improper parking. Fine, $50, 0 cents. Payable within 7 days to avoid additional penalty. This is ridiculous, I said to Jessica, waving the orange violation notice over breakfast. I'm not paying $50 for being 2 inches over an invisible line. Jessica examined the notice, her trained eye catching details I'd missed. Mom, look at the signature. This wasn't issued by the HOA directly. It's signed by D. Peterson, Security Enforcement. Is that even an official position? I was already typing an email to the HOA board, citing specific state laws regarding reasonable enforcement of covenant restrictions. As an attorney, I couldn't let this slide, not just for myself, but on principle. Small abuses of power left unchecked always grow into larger ones. Less than 30 minutes after sending my email, my phone rang, a local number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Mitchell? Richard Connors, Oakwood Estates HOA president. His voice was deep, with a forced politeness that didn't mask the underlying irritation. I received your concerns about our parking enforcement. Perhaps as a newcomer, you don't understand how things work here. We maintain property values through strict adherence to our rules. Everyone follows them, no exceptions. I strongly suggest you pay the fine and adjust your attitude. Before I could respond with the legal precedents I'd already researched, he continued, his tone hardening. Oakwood Estates might not be the right fit for people who can't follow simple rules. Things tend to get uncomfortable for troublemakers. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air for a moment before he added, the next HOA meeting is tomorrow evening. Attendance is mandatory, 7 p.m. sharp at the community center. He hung up before I could say another word. That evening, Jessica and I were discussing strategies for the upcoming meeting when we heard a strange noise from the front yard. Jessica, always alert, was at the window in seconds. Mom, you need to see this. I joined her just in time to watch a heavy-set man in what looked like a security uniform using red spray paint to draw a large X on our front lawn. What the hell do you think you're doing? I called out, rushing to the front door. The man turned slowly, deliberately finishing his vandalism before facing me. Official HOA warning, ma'am. This property has received multiple compliance notices. Multiple? We'd received exactly 1 just this morning. This is your final warning before further action. He tapped the holster on his belt, not subtly, before walking away to a car parked across the street. I was furious, but Jessica's expression was calm, almost amused. Did he just imply he might use a weapon over a parking violation? She asked quietly, pulling out her phone to take photos of the lawn. Mom, I think I'm going to stick around a bit longer than planned. This just got interesting. There was something in her tone that made me pause. Not fear, but the calculated interest of someone who had just spotted a puzzle they were particularly qualified to solve. I don't know what that red X means, I told her, but I'm guessing we've just been marked as troublemakers. Jessica's small smile was unsettling in its confidence. No, Mom. They've just marked themselves as the type of bullies who don't know when they're picking on the wrong person. The next evening, we arrived at the community center for the HOA meeting to find about 40 residents already seated in rows of folding chairs. Richard Connors, a tall man with silver hair and the rigid posture of someone who enjoys authority, stood at the front with Doug, the lawn vandal from yesterday, hovering nearby. I recognized Karen Wilson sitting behind a small table with meeting minutes and financial reports. She avoided eye contact when we walked in. People spoke in hushed tones, falling silent as Richard called the meeting to order. Before we begin, let's welcome our newest resident, Sarah Mitchell. All eyes turned to me. Mrs. Mitchell has already demonstrated her special perspective on our community standards. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but most faces remained impassive. For the next 45 minutes, I watched in horrified fascination as Richard and Doug ran the meeting like petty dictators. Residents who asked about increasing landscaping costs were quickly shut down with vague references to necessary improvements. When a man I would later learn was Michael Garcia questioned why security expenses had tripled in 6 months, Richard interrupted him. We've discussed this before, Michael. Increased security is non-negotiable given recent regional incidents. No specifics were offered, and Michael was not allowed to follow up. I observed residents exchanging glances but remaining silent. The atmosphere of intimidation was palpable. When the financial report concluded, I raised my hand. Richard pointedly looked elsewhere until no other hands remained. Yes, Mrs. Mitchell, he finally acknowledged, not bothering to hide his annoyance. I have several questions about the legal basis for some of your enforcement protocols, I began, my voice steady, particularly the provision allowing HOA representatives to enter private property for compliance inspections. that directly contradicts state property laws unless specific consent is established in the original deed. A tense silence fell over the room. Additionally, your fine structure exceeds what's permissible under state statutes governing homeowners associations, specifically Code 27-45.3. Richard's face flushed, his knuckles whitening around the podium. Mrs. Mitchell, we appreciate your legal opinions. However, our covenant was established with guidance from top HOA attorneys. These matters were settled long before you arrived. His smile didn't reach his eyes. If you'd spend as much time reading the welcome package as you did trying to find loopholes, you'd understand that by purchasing in Oakwood Estates, you've already consented to our governance structure. Perhaps in your next home, you'll do more thorough research before buying. The dismissive tone was meant to humiliate, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks. But years of courtroom experience had taught me to never show when an opponent had landed a blow. As the meeting concluded, I noticed Karen slipping a folded note into my hand as I passed her table. Outside the community center, I unfolded it. Careful, cameras and microphones in common areas. They're watching. Before I could process this warning, Doug deliberately bumped into me, nearly knocking me off balance. We know how to handle people like you, he muttered, just loudly enough for me to hear. Ask the Johnsons why they sold so quickly last year. With that, he walked to his car, the same one that had been parked outside our house the night before. When I returned home, I found Jessica in animated conversation with Linda Thompson and a man I didn't recognize in our living room. Mom, Jessica said, her eyes bright with excitement, I think we've found a small army to fight the neighborhood tyrant. She introduced Michael Garcia, the same man who had asked about security expenses at the meeting. Michael has some very interesting security footage you need to see. Before she could elaborate, my phone chimed with an email notification. The subject line read, Serious violation. $500, 0 cents, fine. Sent from Richard Connor's HOA email address. Unauthorized gathering, I read aloud from my phone. This is absurd. They're claiming having guests in our own home violates HOA rules? Michael nodded grimly. They pulled the same thing with me last month when I hosted my brother's family. Called it an unregistered event exceeding occupancy guidelines. The real issue was that I'd been asking questions about their financial reports. This is how they operate. Find any excuse to pressure people who don't fall in line. Linda sipped her tea, nodding in agreement. They've been doing this for years. Most people just pay the fines to avoid conflict. Those who fight back suddenly find themselves with broken windows that neighborhood kids must have caused, or plumbing issues that mysteriously affect only their homes. She leaned forward. But the Mitchells aren't most people, are they? Jessica grinned, a determined expression I hadn't seen since she took down a notorious fraud ring 3 years ago. Michael has been documenting Richard and Doug's activities for months. Show her, Michael. He opened his laptop and played a series of video clips from his home security system. Richard and Doug accepting cash from a construction contractor working on a house without proper permits. Doug placing violation notices only on homes of residents who had questioned the board. And most disturbing, Richard and a man in a business suit examining houses while referencing a list, including mine. They've got a blacklist, Michael explained. Homes they want to target because the locations are prime for redevelopment once the new commercial zone is approved across the highway. Linda pulled a small notebook from her purse. I'm a retired investigative journalist. Old habits die hard. I've been keeping records of every suspicious activity since Richard took over the HOA 3 years ago. 26 families have been forced out through harassment, selective enforcement, and in some cases, what I'd call outright intimidation. The homes are always purchased by shell companies that trace back to Richard's brother-in-law's real estate investment firm. They're buying low from harassed homeowners and sitting on properties until the rezoning goes through. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just petty power abuse. It was a calculated real estate scheme. So, they're not just neighborhood tyrants. They're real estate predators, I said, feeling the familiar fire that ignited whenever I encountered systematic injustice. As a consumer rights attorney, I'd seen countless schemes to defraud ordinary people, but this one struck a deeper chord. It was happening in my own home, to my own neighbors. They've found a way to weaponize the HOA structure to systematically force out targeted homeowners for profit. Jessica was studying Michael's footage with the intense focus I'd seen her apply to complex FBI cases, her eyes narrowing as she spotted connections invisible to most people. Look at their pattern, she pointed out. They escalate gradually, first minor violations with small fines, then increasingly absurd infractions with larger penalties, followed by maintenance issues that make life uncomfortable, and finally direct intimidation. She paused the footage on Richard's face, zooming in on his expression as he accepted cash from the contractor. "That's not just greed," she observed quietly. "That's the look of someone who enjoys the power. He's not just after money, he's getting psychological satisfaction from controlling people's lives." Linda nodded knowingly. "That's exactly it. I've interviewed dozens of corrupt officials over my journalism career, and there's a certain type who's drawn to positions of petty authority precisely because they can inflict suffering with impunity. The HOA structure is perfect for them. Minimal oversight, broad enforcement powers, and a captive audience who literally can't escape without selling their homes." Michael added, "My security system captured something else last week. Richard telling Doug which houses to target next. He specifically mentioned yours, Sarah, saying you were going to be a problem. He already had plans to squeeze you out before you even challenged him at the meeting." The thought that I had been targeted from the beginning sent a chill down my spine, followed quickly by righteous anger. These bullies had no idea who they were dealing with. A seasoned attorney and an FBI tactical commander who specialized in taking down organized criminals. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the City Housing Authority about the HOA's practices. By afternoon, our water was shut off. "Emergency maintenance on your section of the line," Doug announced when I confronted him, not even trying to hide his smirk. "Should be back on in 6 hours or so. HOA regulations permit essential infrastructure maintenance at our discretion. Maybe keep a few bottles of water handy next time you decide to file complaints." Jessica watched this exchange from the porch, her expression neutral but her eyes calculating. That evening, while I was on a conference call with colleagues, Jessica installed hidden security cameras around our property, using equipment she'd borrowed from her FBI resources. "Just standard precautions," she assured me, "nothing that would compromise any investigation." That night, we noticed Doug's car parked across the street, occasionally shining a flashlight toward our windows. "Intimidation tactics," Jessica explained unfazed. "They're trying to make us uncomfortable enough to either fall in line or move out. Classic bullying behavior, but legally ambiguous enough that if we called the regular police, they'd just say he's conducting neighborhood security." She was typing something on her phone as she spoke. "Remember Karen, the nervous HOA secretary? She just texted me. Wants to meet tomorrow at Riverdale Coffee Shop. Says she can help." Jessica's smile was confident, almost predatory. "Mom, I think we just got ourselves an inside man in the enemy castle." I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with both concern and determination. Through my bedroom window, I could still see the faint outline of Doug's car and the occasional beam of his flashlight sweeping across our front lawn. The red X he had painted still marred our grass, a scarlet badge of defiance that was now becoming a symbol of our resistance. I thought of all the families who had been driven from their homes, who had surrendered to Richard's tactics simply because they lacked the resources or knowledge to fight back. 26 families, Linda had said. 26 households, bullied and threatened until they gave up their homes at deflated prices, all to satisfy one man's greed and power complex. As I finally drifted toward sleep, I found myself smiling, despite the situation. Richard Connors had spent years perfecting his system of intimidation and exploitation, targeting those he perceived as vulnerable or isolated. But in choosing my home, he had made a critical miscalculation. He had no idea that his usual tactics of intimidation would fall flat against a woman who had stared down corporate giants in courtrooms, or that his amateur security enforcer was currently parked outside the home of an FBI tactical commander who had faced down actual terrorists. In his arrogance, Richard had finally picked the wrong targets. Tomorrow, with Karen's help, we would begin turning the tables. The game was indeed on. But Richard was about to discover he was no longer the only one making the rules. The Riverdale Coffee Shop was busy enough to provide anonymity, but quiet enough for conversation. Jessica arrived early, securing a corner table with a view of both entrances, a habit from her FBI training. Karen arrived precisely on time, nervously scanning the room before sitting down. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I'm about to tell you could cost me my job. Maybe worse." Jessica nodded encouragingly, her posture relaxed but alert. "Take your time. We appreciate any help you can offer." Karen extracted a USB drive from her purse, sliding it across the table. "I've been documenting financial discrepancies for 2 years. Richard doesn't know I have accounting experience. He thinks I'm just a glorified secretary who follows orders. There's nearly $500,000 missing from the HOA reserves, funneled through fake maintenance companies that all lead back to shell corporations. Richard's careful, but he's not as clever as he thinks. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. My mother lived in Oakwood before I did. Richard and Doug harassed her for months when she opposed their fee increases. Strange phone calls at night, vandalism the security cameras never seemed to catch, unexplained water damage. She finally sold for 30% below market value to Richard's brother-in-law's company. I took the HOA secretary position to find proof of what they did to her and others. While Jessica was meeting with Karen, I discovered a new line item on our HOA bill. Enhanced Security Assessment, $200, 0 cents/month. When I called the HOA office to question this, I was told it was a special assessment approved by the board due to increased security concerns in the neighborhood. No such concerns had been mentioned at the meeting, nor had any vote for special assessments taken place. I was preparing a formal legal response when Jessica returned from her meeting, her expression both troubled and determined. They're targeting your house specifically, she explained, showing me documents Karen had provided. Your lot is one of 5 that would complete a contiguous block of properties their investment group wants to control before the commercial rezoning application goes through. They've successfully pushed out 3 of the 5 homeowners already. You and the Garcias are the last holdouts. She pulled up a map on her laptop showing property ownership in our neighborhood, with nearly 30% of homes now owned by various LLC names that Karen had confirmed were all connected to Richard's brother-in-law. This isn't just HOA corruption, it's organized real estate fraud. They're manufacturing reasons to fine and harass targeted homeowners, driving down property values and forcing sales, all while Richard's family businesses profit. That evening, Jessica contacted her colleague, Agent Thomas Davis at the FBI, asking him to run background checks on Richard and Doug. While we waited for his response, I discovered my car had been vandalized. The words, "comply or leave," spray-painted across the driver's side. We documented everything, adding to our growing file of evidence. Agent Thomas called back the next day with disturbing information. Richard Connors was forced to resign from the police department after multiple excessive force complaints and an internal affairs investigation into evidence tampering. Charges were dropped under suspicious circumstances. Doug Peterson has no legitimate security credentials, and his concealed carry permit was revoked 3 years ago for brandishing at a supermarket customer. Most concerning, there's an ongoing financial crimes investigation looking into money laundering through several HOAs in your county, including Oakwood Estates. Jessica had just ended the call when she received an urgent text from Michael. Emergency. Doug at my door. He has a gun. She was on her feet immediately, car keys in hand. Stay here, Mom. Call the local police, but tell them this is a potential armed standoff situation to ensure they take it seriously. I'm going over there. Before I could protest, she was out the door, moving with the focused efficiency I'd seen only when she was in full FBI mode. I could barely breathe as I made the call to police, reporting an armed man threatening my neighbor. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way, but mentioned they were short-staffed due to a multi-car accident on the highway. It could be 15 minutes before anyone arrived. 15 minutes is an eternity when someone has a gun pointed at people you care about. I paced the living room, jumping at every sound, praying Jessica's training would keep her safe. After what felt like hours but was actually only 6 minutes, I couldn't stand the waiting. I grabbed my car keys and headed to Michael's house 3 doors down. As I approached, I could see Doug standing on Michael's porch, one hand resting obviously on his holstered gun, the other pointing aggressively at Michael's security cameras. Jessica was already there, positioned between Michael and Doug, her stance casual but her eyes intensely focused. I stayed back, not wanting to escalate the situation, but close enough to hear Doug's angry demands. Those cameras are a violation of HOA privacy standards. They're recording common areas without authorization. Take them down now or face fines of $100 per day, plus immediate removal at your expense. Michael stood his ground in his doorway. The cameras are on my property, recording my property. That's completely legal under state law. There are no HOA regulations that can override that. Doug's face flushed with anger. I'm not asking again. The HOA has determined these cameras violate Section 12 of the covenant regarding surveillance of common areas. Jessica's voice cut through the tension, calm but authoritative. Sir, I've reviewed the Oakwood Estates covenant thoroughly. Section 12 addresses landscape maintenance schedules, not security systems. There is no provision restricting homeowners from installing security cameras on their own property. Her precise knowledge of the regulations clearly caught Doug off guard. "Who the hell are you? This doesn't concern you." Doug's hand moved closer to his holster. "I'm Jessica Mitchell, a family friend staying with the Mitchells. And actually, this does concern me, since you appear to be threatening a homeowner without legal authority." The situation escalated quickly after that. Doug, frustrated by Jessica's calm interference, pulled his gun, waving it between Jessica and Michael. "You people don't understand how things work here. When security says take down the cameras, you take down the damn cameras." Instead of showing fear, Jessica glanced at the gun with an almost clinical interest. "Only amateurs hold a gun like that? Finger on the trigger already? That's interesting." Her casual critique seemed to infuriate Doug further. "You think this is a joke? I'll show you how serious I am." He raised the gun toward the sky and fired a shot, presumably meant to intimidate. What happened next was so fast I could barely follow it. In one fluid motion, Jessica stepped forward, her right hand striking Doug's wrist while her left gripped his elbow. The gun clattered to the ground as she continued the movement, twisting his arm behind his back and taking him to the ground with professional precision. Doug's face registered shock as he found himself immobilized, face down on the porch, Jessica's knee maintaining pressure on his back while she secured his wrists. "Michael," she said calmly, "could you pick up the weapon carefully by the grip, using your shirt to avoid disturbing fingerprints?" Michael complied, his expression a mixture of shock and admiration. "And Mrs. Mitchell," Jessica continued, nodding to me where I stood frozen at the edge of the lawn, "perfect timing. Could you please inform the responding officers that we have an armed suspect detained?" The police arrived moments later, taking in the scene with professional caution. Jessica identified herself as FBI, showing credentials I hadn't even realized she was carrying. The officers' demeanor changed immediately, becoming more deferential as they took custody of Doug and secured the weapon. "This man discharged a firearm in a residential area while threatening civilians," Jessica explained, her tone now fully professional. "The weapon appears to be carried without a valid permit, based on information we've received from federal sources." She gave a concise statement about what she had witnessed, and the officers seemed grateful for her clear, law enforcement-style report. As Doug was being placed in the police car, Richard Connor screeched to a halt at the curb, rushing toward the scene. "What's going on here? Doug works for me, for the HOA. Whatever happened must be a misunderstanding." The lead officer blocked his approach. "Sir, step back. This man discharged a firearm during a threatening confrontation and is being arrested for multiple weapons violations and assault charges." Richard's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You can't arrest our security officer for doing his job. Who made these accusations?" His eyes landed on me, then Jessica, then Michael. "I'll have your badges for this harassment." The officer was unimpressed. "Sir, unless you want to join him for interfering with an arrest, I suggest you step back now." As Richard was forced to watch Doug being driven away, he brushed past Jessica with a threatening whisper. "You've made a serious mistake. You have no idea who we are or what we can do." Jessica's response was a calm smile. "Funny, that's exactly what I was about to say to you." Richard's retaliation was swift and calculated. The next morning, our mailbox was stuffed with violation notices. 17 in total, ranging from unapproved landscape modifications, the red X Doug himself had painted, to unauthorized security equipment, our cameras. Each carried a minimum fine of $100. That night, someone destroyed the flowers in our front garden, pulling plants from the ground and leaving them strewn across the lawn. The security footage showed 2 teenagers doing the damage, but their faces were covered and they were careful to avoid clear views of the cameras. The message was clear. Richard had resources beyond just Doug, and he wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, Agent Thomas informed Jessica that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had accelerated their investigation into the Oakwood Estates HOA based on the information we'd provided. We've been building a case against several coordinated HOA fraud schemes in the region. Richard Connor's operation appears to be one node in a larger network. The physical intimidation and weapons charges add significant weight to what was previously just a financial investigation. Heron continued providing inside information, delivering copies of financial records showing nearly $500,000 diverted from HOA funds through fake service contracts to companies owned by Richard's relatives. Sarah organized a meeting of concerned homeowners at a restaurant outside the neighborhood to avoid HOA surveillance. 23 residents attended, many sharing similar stories of harassment, selective enforcement, and mysterious property damage after questioning Richard's leadership. Together, they formed the Fair Homeowners Alliance and drafted a petition demanding a special election to replace the current board. Karen, still maintaining her cover as Richard's loyal secretary, informed us that Richard was furious about the growing opposition. He scheduled an emergency HOA meeting, placing membership termination procedures prominently on the agenda, a thinly veiled threat to have me expelled from the community. The emergency meeting was held on a Tuesday evening. Jessica and I arrived to find the room packed, with Richard, 3 board members, and their attorney seated at the front table. Doug's absence was conspicuous. He'd been released on bail but ordered to stay away from the neighborhood. Richard called the meeting to order with barely contained anger. We're facing an organized effort to undermine the standards that make Oakwood Estates the premier community in this region. Certain new residents, his glare fixed on me, have demonstrated blatant disregard for our rules and have incited others to join their disruptive behavior. He turned to his attorney. Mr. Brennan will outline the board's authority to terminate membership for residents who pose a threat to community standards. I had come prepared with my own legal colleague, Patricia Reyes, an HOA specialist who had battled Richard's type before. When Richard tried to prevent me from speaking, multiple residents stood up in protest. "Let her speak," Michael called out, backed by a chorus of agreement. Richard's face darkened as he realized he'd lost control of the room. I approached the microphone, laying out evidence of financial mismanagement, selective enforcement, and the pattern of targeting specific property. I didn't reveal everything we knew, saving key evidence for potential legal proceedings, but presented enough to make it clear this wasn't just a personal grievance. The atmosphere shifted dramatically when Karen unexpectedly stood up from her secretary position. "Everything Mrs. Mitchell has said is true. I have documents proving the financial irregularities." Richard's face went from red to white in seconds. "Karen, sit down! You're out of order!" But Karen continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've witnessed board members intimidating residents, falsifying violation records, and misappropriating funds for years. I've kept records and copies of everything." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Richard, losing all pretense of control, shouted above the noise, "This meeting is adjourned. Everyone leave now." But no one moved. Instead, Linda Thompson stood up. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board, as permitted under Article 8 of our bylaws, during any official meeting with quorum present." Richard stormed out of the meeting, shouting that everyone will regret this as he slammed the door. The remaining board members, seeing the unified opposition, claiming that they had been unaware of his actions. The membership voted overwhelmingly to remove the entire board and schedule proper elections. As Jessica and I drove home, we felt cautiously victorious, but knew Richard wouldn't surrender his power without a final fight. "Well, he's cornered now," Jessica warned. "That makes him more dangerous than ever." Her words proved prophetic. When we arrived home, the front door lock had been broken. From the darkness inside, Richard's voice called out, "We need to talk privately, and this time, no one's calling the police." My heart pounded as Jessica motioned for me to stay behind her, her right hand instinctively reaching toward her hip where her service weapon would normally be, but she was off duty, unarmed. "Richard," she called calmly into the darkened house, "breaking and entering is a federal crime. Add that to brandishing a weapon, and you're looking at serious time." A harsh laugh came from our living room to me and closed the door. "I know who you are now, Jessica Mitchell. My friends at the police department ran your name after yesterday's incident. FBI tactical, quite impressive, but even federal agents need to sleep, and accidents happen to everyone." We entered cautiously to find Richard seated in my favorite armchair, a handgun resting casually on his knee. Jessica assessed the situation with a quick glance, noting exits, positions, distances, before focusing on Richard himself. "What's your endgame here, Richard? You've already lost control of the HOA. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has been investigating you for months. Walking away now with what you've already skimmed would be your smartest move." I noticed Jessica subtly pressing something in her pocket, activating her phone's recording function and the hidden security cameras we'd installed. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Very direct, Agent Mitchell. I appreciate that. So I'll be direct too. I have this." He held up a thick document with one hand, keeping the gun steady with the other. "A complete retraction of all accusations, signed by both of you, accompanied by your immediate notice to sell your property. In return, I'm prepared to be generous, $50,000 above your purchase price. Sign now, we all move on with our lives. Refuse? He gestured with the gun, and things get complicated. Jessica tilted her head curiously. That's your solution? More threats? You realize that's what got you into this mess in the first place. For the next 20 minutes, Jessica masterfully kept Richard talking about his plans, his grievances, his sense of entitlement to control the neighborhood. She led him through a conversation that systematically extracted confessions to multiple crimes, all while appearing merely to be negotiating. So, let me understand this correctly. She said at one point, you and your brother-in-law's investment firm have been targeting specific properties because they complete a development block that will be worth 3 times as much after rezoning? Richard, feeling in control with his weapon, became increasingly boastful about the scheme. He would be thankful to do the work for her. 34 properties acquired over 3 years, most at 20 to 30% below market value. Once the commercial rezoning goes through next month, we'll clear $7 million in profit, minimum. The fools who sold never even realized what was coming. As Richard continued revealing details, the shell companies, the kickbacks to city planning officials, the coordination with other HOAs in the region, I watched Jessica patiently building a comprehensive confession. When she asked about Doug's an idiot, useful for scaring old ladies and placing violation notices. He'll take the weapons charges and keep his mouth shut if he knows what's good for him. I've got enough dirt on half the police department to ensure this all goes away. Jessica nodded sympathetically. It must be frustrating dealing with incompetent help. Is that why you decided to handle us personally? Richard's ego couldn't resist the bait. Some situations require a personal touch. Your mother was becoming a rallying point for the malcontents. You proved unexpectedly resourceful. Together, you threatened 3 years of careful planning. Sometimes, you need to remove obstacles decisively. Richard finally lost patience with the conversation. Enough talk. Sign the documents now, or I'll make this look like a tragic home invasion gone wrong. He raised the gun directly at me. Your daughter might be FBI, but even she can't move faster than a bullet. Jessica remained unnervingly calm. Before you pull that trigger, Richard, you should know 2 things. First, that gun you're holding has been reported stolen from the police evidence room 3 years ago, part of why you retired early, I'm guessing. Second, this entire conversation has been transmitted live to my colleague, Agent Thomas Davis, who is currently parked down the street with a tactical team. Richard's momentary confusion gave Jessica the opening she needed. With explosive speed, she executed a perfect disarming technique, stepping inside his aim while controlling his wrist, removing the gun from his grasp before he could react. In the same fluid movement, she twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him face down onto the floor. Richard Connors, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted extortion, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and about a dozen other charges we'll sort out later. The front door burst open, and Agent Thomas entered with 4 FBI agents in tactical gear, weapons drawn. Perfect timing, Jessica said, not even slightly out of breath as she maintained her hold on Richard. Our friend here's been quite informative. Richard's face contorted with shock and rage as he was handcuffed. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I have friends in, Jessica cut him off, in the police department, the DA's office, city planning. Yes, we know. They're all being investigated too. Financial Crimes Task Force has been watching your entire network for months. Your HOA scam was just the tip of the iceberg that led us to a much bigger operation. Thomas nodded respectfully to Jessica as his team secured Richard. Commander Mitchell, any further instructions? Richard's eyes widened at the title. Commander? Jessica smiled slightly. Special Tactical Operations Commander, FBI, Chicago Field Office. And you just threatened my mother at gunpoint. Not your smartest move, Richard. 1 week later, our backyard was filled with neighbors for an impromptu community barbecue. The news of Richard and Doug's arrests had spread quickly, along with details of the larger investigation into HOA fraud schemes across the county. Linda had been elected interim HOA president, with Karen serving as treasurer and Michael heading a newly formed transparency committee. The atmosphere was celebratory but also cathartic. Many residents shared stories of intimidation they'd previously been too frightened to discuss. I can't believe we put up with it for so long, one elderly gentleman told me, shaking his head. We were all so isolated, thinking we were the only ones being targeted. Divide and conquer. It's an old tactic. Jessica was helping serve drinks, looking relaxed and at home among our neighbors. She'd extended her leave to help reorganize the HOA with proper checks and balances, drawing on her FBI experience with organizational structures. "I've officially requested a transfer to the Chicago field office," she told me quietly, as we watched the children playing on the newly restored lawn. "This whole experience made me realize I've been too far from family. Besides, there's clearly work to be done here. The real estate fraud investigation is expanding, and I want to see it through." I couldn't have been happier about this development, though I worried about the higher risk assignments she sometimes took. Reading my expression, she squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, Mom. Most of my work will be organizational and investigative. The tactical team is just one part of what I do." News of the Oakwood Estates case had caught the attention of national media, highlighting the growing problem of HOA abuse and real estate fraud schemes using homeowners associations as vehicles. Several investigative reporters had contacted me for interviews, and a state senator had reached out about strengthening legislation around HOA governance and transparency. I had agreed to serve as legal consultant for the new HOA board, helping rewrite the covenant to remove unenforceable provisions and establish clear rights for homeowners. The victory felt important beyond just our neighborhood, a small but significant pushback against the abuse of power that can happen in even the most ordinary settings. 3 months later, I sat in the courtroom as Richard and Doug faced a judge for sentencing. The prosecution had built an airtight case, bolstered by Karen's meticulous records, the recorded confession from our living room, and financial documentation uncovered by the FBI investigation. Richard had tried desperately to implicate others and reduce his own culpability, but the evidence was overwhelming. His attempts to intimidate witnesses from jail had only added to his charges. Jessica testified in her full FBI uniform, her professional demeanor and commanding presence leaving no doubt about the seriousness of Richard's threats against us. The judge was unsparing in her assessment. "Mr. Connors, you abused a position of neighborhood trust to orchestrate a sophisticated fraud scheme using intimidation and threats of violence against the very homeowners you were elected to represent. Your actions show a disturbing pattern of escalation that culminated in armed home invasion." Richard stared straight ahead, his former arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his life collapse. "This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison for the combined charges plus full financial restitution to the homeowners association and affected residents." Doug received 8 years for his role, with the judge noting his cooperation had earned him some leniency. As we left the courthouse, a reporter asked how it felt to take down an HOA tyrant. I thought about the fear I'd felt when Richard broke into our home, the anger when Doug vandalized our property, and the gradual relief as neighbors united against their bullying. "It feels like remembering that even small injustices matter," I replied, "and that standing up to them sometimes requires a community, not just an individual." Jessica added with a smile, "And sometimes it requires knowing when you're pointing a gun at the wrong person's mother." Back in Oakwood Estates, life had transformed. The newly elected HOA board operated with unprecedented transparency, posting all financial records online and holding open meetings. The previously intimidated residents had found their voices, creating a vibrant community that actually delivered on the promise of neighbors becoming family. On our front lawn, where Doug had once spray-painted his threatening red X, we placed a small, humorous sign. "This area protected by FBI. Think twice before pointing guns." It always made visitors laugh, but for us, it represented something profound about standing up to bullies, regardless of what official-looking uniforms they might wear. Sometimes, to handle a bully, all you need is a determined mother, a daughter with specialized skills, and a community that finally refuses to be afraid. And, perhaps, a bit of luck, when the bad guys are foolish enough to point a gun at exactly the wrong person.